Shin Megami Tensei 5 is an experience unlike anything I was really expecting. I've been following the game since 2017 when it was officially announced, and ever since getting my hands on the game, thanks to a review code provided by Atlas West, I just can't stop thinking about it. I've done everything I can hypothetically really do in the game. I've gotten all of the endings, and I've played over 80 hours in the world, and the entire process of making this review has been really interesting for me. I've reviewed games before, I've previewed, and God knows I've talked enough about SMT5 over the course of its development and release, but something about this one just really hit me different. Something about this game not only kind of lived up to the expectation of, hey, I'm looking forward to this JRPG, it's just, hey, this is something I don't often feel like with a bunch of games, ranging from the world, the characters, the music. So many different factors hit me in so many different ways, and by no means is this a perfect game, but something about this really struck a chord with me in a way that I wasn't expecting, to the point that I'll be really amazed if, in a few years, this game is not remembered as being a cult classic and progressing the Shin Megami Tensei series forward for a completely new generation of fans, just like Persona 3 did with the Persona series in the West. Plus, the biggest benefit that Shin Megami Tensei 5 has in this regard is, even though it is a Switch exclusive, the Switch is an incredibly popular system, and one of the biggest things that the system has going for it is because of its large install base, even in the year 2021, word of mouth can help so many games help sell so much better than they would even if they were on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox, and PC. So, if there's anything I can predict about this review that I hope doesn't age poorly, is that this game continues to sell very, very well, continues to make new fans happy, old fans happy, and years down the line people still look at it as fondly as I do now, after spending basically the last month of my life eating, sleeping, and breathing SMT5. So, without further ado, what the heck is SMT5? SMT5 obviously is the fifth mainline SMT game developed and published by Atlas. But what's really interesting about this is SMT5 is really a breath of fresh air, not only for me as a longtime fan of the series, let alone Atlas games in general, but more specifically RPGs. I felt things and thought differently about the genre as a whole while playing the game. Some immediate examples would be traditional dungeon design, and different aspects of pacing, questline, storytelling, and stuff like that. This game really messed with my expectations, and not in ways that I found disappointing, in fact, quite the opposite. I found it really added to the overall experience because I never knew what was coming around the corner, let alone the setting or the story and different aspects like that. So let's at least just start right at the top. What is the story of this game? And if you made it this far, or didn't look at the title or description, this video is completely spoiler-free. All of the footage you're going to be seeing is mostly just going to be from the original area. You'll see some future demons and stuff like that, but nothing you wouldn't have seen if you've seen any trailers for the game leading up to its release. So, much like every other JRPG known to man, Shin Megami Tensei 5 takes place in Tokyo. Basically, you are a nameless protagonist that you and your magical iPad get to decide who you are and what you are doing in that world. Basically, you are introduced as a relatively new student at this school. All we really know about the world at the beginning is that this is a world that is currently going through a little bit of mystery and turmoil. You know that dangerous things are happening, you're told to go back to your student dormitory with a partner, and you're searching around the school looking and introducing yourself to new people while also just trying to get out of school for the day. While you're leaving the school, you're introduced to an initial cast of characters, and one of the things I have to say that really stands out to me about this game, with the cast specifically, is how much I really enjoyed my time with the characters, and that really wasn't a 100% even amount, unfortunately. There are definitely some characters that get a little bit of a snub, not to name any specific names, but I think it's a real testament to all of the characters in the story that there was no one I didn't care about. Through all of my time playing other games, even like Persona 5, there are definite times where I'm looking at the cast and I'm like, okay, you're interesting, I could care less about your story, move on, blah blah blah. And with SMT5, what I found was so interesting was every main character it introduced me to, I was like, okay, I want to know more about you, I want to know about your backstory, I want to know what makes you tick, I want to know what makes you think, because these characters are the lifeblood of how you get to experience the story, because your character is a silent protagonist, for the most part, outside of your occasional battle grunts and noises. Thankfully, the entire cast of the game does a really tremendous job with what they are given. All the story that's there was always way more than I was expecting. When I was playing through Nocturne HD recently, leading up to this release, I found myself lamenting some of these characters that I originally was nostalgic for, but upon multiple years after its original release, found myself thinking how flat they were, how lifeless they were, and how little the story actually cared enough to explain their own existence. They didn't feel like real people living in this world. They felt like character models that were thrown into a cutscene whenever the game deemed it appropriate. SMT5, thankfully, excels in so many aspects, from the main named characters to even the nameless NPCs you'll find all around the world, at making them feel like, hey, these people existed. They're adding context, they're adding a lot of lore. If there's one thing this game's going to give you a lot of, it's going to give you so much lore, and really for me, I just ate it up. Like, I could not get enough about this world, what had happened before, what was currently happening, and what was going to happen to it in the future. It was really, really nice to just dive into this world, feel lost without feeling like I was running around aimlessly. This game does a really good job at not holding your hand, but giving you a nice carrot close enough that it's negging you on to the next level without making you feel like you're stuck in this endless loop of never getting enough to eat. On the topic of pacing, I have to give a huge shout out to this game. It does an amazing job at getting you into the game. On my initial playthrough, I was jumping into the world, fighting demons within less than an hour, and the story leading up to it didn't feel slow or monotonous. It felt like it made sense. We were getting to a understandable point, and the game did a really good job of not doing that thing a lot of RPGs are definitely guilty of, is kind of abusing that opening couple of hours of like, hey, we need to teach you about this world, so we're going to hold your hand and tutorialize everything. This game is obviously going to teach you all of its systems one step at a time, but it does it at a really nice pace with this game. You're going home, you can't go home. You go to the train station, you can't make it there. You have to go to a tunnel, you and a bunch of other characters get sucked into this magical netherworld, and here you are, demons, angels, everyone's fighting, you have no idea what's going on, and an incredibly handsome god is holding your hand and making you become the Nahabino. So, once you become the Nahabino, which is way faster than I had initially expected, I was so impressed at what adding this second character really added to the story in a really good way. Obviously, this is nothing new with SMT, especially if you played something like Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, but I think what was nice about Aogami compared to Dogda is the fact that Aogami felt a lot more like your partner in a way that he was also still being an active participant. He wasn't like this lifeless robot. I think Damon's performance as Aogami is a really big testament to I always wanted to have him interject way more than he even did, and not because he doesn't say enough, but because when he does talk, he adds a lot of interesting perspectives, because yes, he is your partner, yes, he is what helps you become the Nahabino and become powerful, and it does have ties to Japan and everything going on with the story, but he is still his own character. You two work together, he is aiming to help you survive and progress in this world, but I always really liked that dynamic of, this isn't one person becoming two and then the original person's gone. This is a pure fusion. Now, speaking of demons and summoning, one of the best things about this game and how quickly it gets you into the gameplay is the mechanics it has with not only summoning demons, recruiting demons, battling demons, and how that whole process works. Now, I'm not going to break down every system and how it works, but I will say it did a really nice job building on the press turn system from previous games, while also adding a lot of interesting new elements. Specifically with demon recruiting, I was so impressed by all of the different dialogue options. I thought the different dialogue options was a really nice pace that made it feel like you're not just talking to an algorithm of one or two lines. This really felt like an actual species of demons you're trying to recruit, and then not in some random way where it seems like there's no actual chance of you getting it. There's definitely a rhyme and a reason behind everything. It's just going to have growing pains as you're talking to different demons, finding higher level ones, coming back to them later when you're able to recruit them, running into demons that you can't actually recruit with, or even just having other demons talk to each other. There was a really nice system that always kept me curious about what to expect with the next demon, and never felt like, okay, well, I have this party who's super stacked, I have no reason to talk to these. I thought, okay, this is a new demon, let's add them to my compendium. I want to do this not for the completion aspect, but just because it's adding more to the world, it's more interesting dialogue options, and it's helping flesh out my experience in total, along with progressing, making my character stronger, and adding to my overall roster for fusions and different aspects like that. Obviously, fusions are a really big aspect of Shin Megami Tensei, and one of the things I really like about SMT5 is how it really streamlined the experience. Obviously, you have your fusions that are going to be two demons fusing together to create something new, but they also still have different aspects, like you can look up specific demons and then see who would be required. There are special demons, whether it be boss demons or special demons like Alice, who you might not normally come across, but if you have these multiple demons, this is what it would take to summon them, and to help kind of alleviate the guesswork out of the whole experience. Because I think, especially for longtime fans, there's always that moment of like, okay, I know I want, let's say, Black Frost. The game does a good job at also doling out all the demons, whether they be normal or special fusion only demons, at a really good pace. There was never a point where it felt like all good demons or all the demons I wanted were at the halfway point or at the end. I was really surprised with how much they were kind of spreading out original demons that were new to 5 with classic demons through the whole experience. Obviously, there are way more returning demons than brand new designs or even original new demons for this in general, but the game does a really good job at kind of always giving just enough breadcrumbs of like, ooh, okay, here's a new demon, or here's this new design, things like that that were always making me excited, not only to check out more of the demons around the world, but also just one out of hundreds of reasons why I'm enjoying checking out the Overworld. So, let's go into the Overworld. One of the hugest changes for this game is that it has a Overworld. It's not an open world RPG by any stands. This is not Breath of the Wild, this is not Skyrim. But it is much larger hubs that you are exploring. In place of traditional dungeons or cities, you are exploring this netherworld, and these netherworld locations, while still overall linear, are clearly designed. These don't feel like giant lifeless hubs. Considering the theme of this game is mostly a desert, that would be incredibly disappointing if it was just one big round map with a couple of highlighted areas. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end to each of these open worlds, but there's tons of little branching paths that you can go on to find other things. There can be subquests you can go on. There can be special collectible items, whether it be glory, which are used to give yourself new skills or just make your character overall more powerful. There are collectible items and characters known as the Memon. The Memon are these awesome little guys you can find all over the world, and they add extra bits of lore not only to what's happening in the world where you're at right now, but they also give you nice little nuggets of information about what had happened in the world previously before the apocalypse hit. So it's really nice, not only in terms of being a really addicting collectible, because there are 200 of them spread out through the whole game, but the nice thing about it, as well as each one you find, is making your character more powerful, adding to your glory, and giving you more items and unlockables for each different tier when you return them to their home. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that people might find themselves missing are traditional dungeon designs. While there are still obviously smaller, closed encounter dungeons where you're going through different floors, challenging different enemies, and eventually finding a boss, if you are expecting SMT5 to live up to Strange Journey or even 4 and Apocalypse, you are definitely not going to get what you expected with that experience. This is something very new. We are replacing dungeons, we're replacing puzzles with exploration, platforming, and by God, thankfully the platforming is good in this game. A open world game with this much platforming, this much traversing, and this much world building, I think it would be really hard to fit in puzzles, optional dungeons without the scope of the game becoming even larger, even crazier, and even more ambitious. And not to say that SMT5 isn't ambitious, they definitely pick and chose their battles very carefully. I think the team at Atlas was very deliberate in saying, let's make a larger world with a purpose, let's make it honed, let's not make this the Phantom Pain where it's this giant open environment with nothing to do, let's make the worlds feel like there's a purpose, there's a goal, you're going to this tower, you're going to this building, you're going to find your friends, and there's a reason behind everything you're doing, while still giving you dozens, if not hundreds, of optional bosses, new quests, new characters to meet, new demons to run into, and new enemies to turn into allies. The game does a really good job at making you be like, oh, yeah, let's go do that, let's go do that. Or, oh, one more thing. This is definitely a game that if you have a whole afternoon free, or if you're planning on playing for 5 minutes, it's going to turn into 50. This was a game that, at least for me, I very specifically kind of had to get into 2 specific moods to play, even though I could play it portably or on the TV. The thing that was so funny about it was, for me, is the game looked so good on my TV that I was like, okay, I have to just play this on the TV because of how gorgeous this game looks in the presentation-wise. And the other thing with it was, I could never imagine myself just playing this game 5 or 10 minutes and then putting it down, because then I'd be like, oh gosh, I really need to get back, or really need to just like give this game more attention, because I can't just pick it up, put it down without it just sticking in the back of my brain. It's like I need to devote a good amount of time to this game. And all of my sessions with this game would range from, I think I had sessions that maybe lasted 90 minutes to even one where I played the game for almost like 6 hours straight. It's really, really addicting, and the nice thing about it is, even though it's addicting, it's also very, very challenging. There are moments where it doesn't feel like you're just blowing through the game on any difficulty. I think it's really, really done a great job of offering different difficulties for everyone out of the box. Obviously, there's safety, that's an optional, super easy difficulty level you can have. That's definitely one for, hey, do you just want to experience the story and barely have any level of challenge for the RPG aspect? Then you can play safety. Casual, I would say, is probably, if you're new to this series, casual is the way to go in terms of, I want a challenge, but I don't want it to be so punishing I'm having a hard time. Normal is definitely going to kick your butt in a way that seems fair, but still teaching you a lesson and letting you know more about what's going on in the game. Hard, it lives up to its name. It's very hard, there's a lot of health, enemies are definitely way spongier, but if you're someone who wants to have the hardest of the hard challenge, that is there if you would like. Now, on the topic of performance, I cannot say enough good things about this game. This was obviously developed exclusively for the Nintendo Switch, which is not the most powerful hardware out there. So when I first heard that this game was going to be developed on Unreal Engine 4, I was genuinely really nervous, because this is not a system known to excel with Unreal Engine 4. With rare expectations of ports like Dragon Quest XI's, there's not a lot of titles out there that natively run in a way that people would really be proud of or kind of show off. And thankfully, this was not a situation like a Deadly Premonitions where the game was solid, but there's a caveat with how it looks and performs. Atlus really did a lot of technical wizardry here. They made this game run at a dynamic resolution that usually hovers anywhere between the 500p to 720p from docked and portable, to a dynamic resolution that is more often than not in the 30s. It can dip a little bit lower when things are getting crazy, but never when the game needs you to actually be doing consistent actions, which is more than understandable for me, especially with a game that has such large open environments with, for the most part, one loading screen when you're in that world, and then is a totally seamless thing as long as you're not going to different hubs, entering battle, or have died. So, very understandable there. I will say, though, one of the things that I do always find funny is that this is totally a unlocked frame rate, so there are moments in the game, mostly when you're in menus or fusing, where the game has tiny glimpse at running at 60, and of course, that's not really going to be indicative of the whole experience, but I do at least find it funny that Atlus was forward-thinking enough not just to design this game at a locked 30 and a locked maybe 720, but they were like, hey, if this game ever comes to other systems, we want to make sure this thing looks gorgeous and can run at as high of a fidelity as possible. So I cannot commend them enough on that. And seriously, for me, I think that this is the best looking Switch game I have played all year personally, and one of the, if not the best examples of how you make a game exclusively on Unreal look and perform on the Switch. So Atlus, my hat is off to you. You've done an amazing job, and I really hope you do a GDC talk or a behind the scenes video one day about how you made this thing work on the Switch as well as you did. Now, if we're talking about presentation, visuals is all well and good, but I cannot ignore the fact that this game has an incredible soundtrack. And the best part about this soundtrack for me personally has just been the fact that it always kept me on my toes, because I never kind of knew what to expect in terms of its themes, its battle arrangements, its world tracks. Characters were always being introduced or playing new tracks that really kept me guessing, and one of the best parts about this is there's not like one specific camp I would put this game's genre in, which I really, really appreciate with video game soundtracks. It's very much freeform. There can be very heavy electronic tracks, whereas there can be rock. There can be so many different kind of instruments that I would never have expected, and this game has so many just absolute banger tracks you maybe hear once or twice if you're lucky, and had me immediately being like, oh my gosh, we need a full original soundtrack release of this ASAP, because there are so many boss themes that are just instant classics the second you hear it, And one of the best things with it as well, for a very lengthy RPG, which is what SMT5 definitely is, I would say you're very much going to be lucky. Without speed running through the game, I would say your first playthrough is going to take you anywhere from 50 to 60 hours, assuming you're doing a good amount of the content. And please, do not skimp on any of the content. If you're playing this game, play all of it. Do all of the side quests, check out all of the endings. You're doing yourself a disservice by skipping out on even the tiniest of fetch quests, because like I said, similarly with talking to all the characters, there is lore everywhere you turn. Similarly with becoming a cult status, it's hard to tell in the early months of a game's release how a soundtrack's going to be remembered, so I can't confidently say there's going to be a track here that's as well remembered as the battle theme from Nocturne or SMT4, but for me personally, this is easily one of the best soundtracks I have heard all year, and is, without a doubt, my favorite SMT soundtrack of all time. And this is mostly just coming off of comparing it to 1, 2, 3, If, 4, Apocalypse, and Strange Journey, which is still incredibly high regard, especially from a series that is known for having such awesome composers and such awesome arrangements and tracks. Also, if you are a fan of any previous game, there are so many awesome Easter eggs that reference things from very obscure Japanese-only titles to even something as obscure as one of my favorite Atlas PS2 titles that I won't even ruin for you here, but when I saw this reference, I thought, that is amazing. I think maybe 100 people in the West are going to know what it's from, but if you do, you're probably going to freak out just as much as I did. So this game, of course, does not skimp on the soundtrack, but definitely doesn't skimp on the Easter eggs and fun callbacks. Now, going back a little bit to the gameplay, I kind of want to talk about something similar to Fusions, but is definitely new to this game, and that's essences. So basically, while running through the world, doing quests, or collecting items, you can find different essences from demons or characters, and basically you can fuse those powers to new characters, power up old characters, get characters that might only know certain skills or learn certain skills, give them moves that they would never otherwise have the ability to have. Do you have a character who's weak to fire? Make them no longer weak to fire. Make them repel fire. This is a really nice system of picking and choosing your team, and they give you so many different essences all the time that it never really made you feel like, oh god, if I don't do this one, then I'm never going to be able to get this skill back, with the exception of Aogami's essences. So those give Nahabino very specific attacks and different animations, and these ones for sure, you're going to want to be careful with when you use them. But for the most part, the game does a really good job of having you discover them naturally through breaking open treasure chests, and giving you these skills at just the right time, leading up to certain boss fights, using certain weaknesses when you need to without explicitly telling you, of like saying, hey, there's this kind of demon, make sure you have this skill here. So I really like the overall freedom the game gives you, not only in terms of just the exploration and team building with fusion and negotiations, but also just with the different level of freedom that essences give us, in the sense of, it let me keep demons around that I would normally not have, because, okay, well, this guy doesn't have this skill, I should fuse this, or I should have this type of demon instead. I was able to keep all of my demons I wanted for as long as possible until something came out that I was like, oh my gosh, I have to trade her out for this, or I have to trade out Mothman for that. So if you're someone who has, hey, I like my certain types of demons, I like this one team, and it's not a necessarily super omega level powerful endgame team, this is just a, hey, this is a team that means a lot to me. I really like this demon's design, or I really am a fan of this character just throughout the series, or this one has a lot of nostalgia for me, or even, like I said, just a dumb meme team. This game lets you make your meme team as powerful as you want without it ever feeling OP or grindy or anything like that. So again, hats off to them making this game really just kind of feel fun, have a really good fast pacing to it, and also just letting you have the flexibility to play the way you want to without feeling like you have to learn 900 different systems or making anything too overly complicated. Now, going back to the story, I talked about before, one of my tiny complaints in this game was there's definitely not equal treatment in terms of stories for certain characters, and while that is definitely true, I kind of then wanted to talk about the overall story without getting into any spoilers. Now, as anyone who knows about SMT may know, there are usually 3 different routes. There is law, neutral, and chaos. Now, while this game has 4 endings, those 3 themes are definitely very prevalent, but one of the biggest things I have to say this game does an extremely excellent job of is having those 3 routes always seem gray all the way up until the very end of the story. You're constantly meeting new characters or seeing characters evolve in ways that you might think, okay, well, this character must be bad, so clearly they're going to be chaos, or this character has to be good, so they must be law. And I really liked how the game always kind of twisted and turned expectations with the story in ways that I always really appreciated. So while there may have been times where I was like, oh, I wish this character had a little more screen time, or oh, I wish this plot had maybe developed a little bit more, it never actually led to the overall story feeling dissatisfying. All 4 endings are extremely interesting, and for the most part, picking Law, Chaos, or Neutral had a vastly different ending, and while you're still doing the same couple of boss fights and final dungeon for all 3 of them, it was so interesting of how those themes felt very prevalent and really interesting. So even though I'm doing the same action multiple times to get different endings, it never felt like a chore. And the game does a really good job of, if you're pretty strategic with your save points, it's not doing multiple checks. This isn't like Nocturne, where if you mess up at 1 or 2 spots, you're going to get this ending, so now you have to do a completely different run. So if you are someone out there who enjoys having your answers matter and giving you different endings based on the answers you pick, this might be something that disappoints you, which obviously is kind of a take it or leave it. For me personally, I've always thought when Atlas gives you multiple choices, it really doesn't matter until they say it matters at the end, and SMT5 definitely takes that track record and runs with it. So while you will have multiple chances of getting asked answers that may be more law, neutral, or chaos-based, you can get any ending you want at pretty much any time on your first playthrough. So it's never going to lock you out. There are certain aspects and skills and demons that may be exclusive if you pick and favor one route or one answer more than the other, but the overall story is not going to lock you out because you may have picked a law answer at one point, but you decide to switch and turn heal and go chaos at the very end of the game. So I personally appreciated that, but it definitely did ring home even more than ever with any Atlas title of when you're giving us multiple choices, it really doesn't matter 90% of the time, because at the end of the day, you're going to tell us the story you have in mind. You're not making this Obsidian-like game of multiple branching story paths, characters live, characters die. It's very much, here's a story that's the same for everybody for 95% of it, and that last 5% is going to make you think a lot, but just don't think about how you got there too hard, otherwise it might seem a little bit more shallow than you were probably expecting. Now, one of the final things I wanted to talk about with this game is DLC. In terms of content, I think this game is an absolute steal at $60 or whatever your country is charging it at. This is definitely a game that I feel very much like I got my money's worth out of, and this is coming from someone who has spent $120 on the Collector's Edition, who has spent $30 for all of the DLC to check out for my podcast or review and everything else in my impressions. So after spending over $150 to check out all of the content in this game, if you are just picking up this game with no special edition, no DLC, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that this game is definitely going to give you your money's worth. So just because there are DLC exclusive demons or Demi-Fiend is a $10 expansion boss rush quest, don't look at that and think that, oh my gosh, this game is just cutting out content and I'm getting less of an experience. Yes, if you don't like DLC, I totally understand it, but I at least want to say, if you never touch the DLC, there is still an incredibly lengthy game with multiple endings. There's still a super boss. There's still tons for you to do in this game without having to worry about what DLC got cut, what experience you're not getting. But if you do buy that DLC, I will say this is actually some of the better DLC Atlas has made. The quality of the demons that are exclusive are really, really nice models. There's actually quests behind them. The amount of voice work they did for the Demi-Fiend DLC alone is very, very commendable. So if you are someone who is very nostalgic for Nocturne like myself and want to see the Fiends in a battle, you want to fight Demi-Fiend himself, you want to see how mean can this game be to me with still being fair technically, then this DLC is for you. Obviously, if you want to avoid grindier stuff, or if you want to make the game less grindy for you, the Mitama DLC is there, but obviously that's going to be your mileage may vary for different aspects like that. Also, with DLC, there is Japanese voiceover in the West. If you want to experience the game's original Japanese voice actors, you can download. It's about 3 gigabytes. But I must actually say, for me personally, this has to be one of the best quality dubs Atlas has ever produced. In my opinion, I loved everybody, ranging from characters who had a little bit of screen time to characters who absolutely stole the show to me. So characters like the Prime Minister, Ichiro, Nua, all these characters I really didn't know what to expect going into it. Their English voice performance was just such a great job, and the entire cast absolutely stole the show. From minor characters like demons to big characters like Abdiel, Kansu, and the entire Bethel organization were such a delight to see, and such a breath of fresh air from what I was expecting in terms of voice actors, voice acting, presentation, stuff like that. So extra big shout out to everyone who worked on this game at Cup of Tea. I at least want to say, for me personally, this is one of the best English dubs I have heard all year long. This is easily one of my favorite Atlas dubs of all time. So if you are someone who normally plays with Japanese only, I would at least recommend give it a shot. It's a really interesting cast. It's a really interesting performance for everybody, and no one really stands out as underwhelming, which is definitely not the norm for a lot of games that are dubbed into English from Japanese. As you can probably tell, this game is really good. This game excelled storytelling-wise, music-wise, presentation-wise, and in the few aspects I could actually criticize for the game, most of those never really took away from my experience. I had a smile on my face from my first hour to my 10th death to my 80th hour completing the game with all of the endings. I really loved this game, and the only thing I've enjoyed more than playing this game is seeing everyone's reactions to it online, seeing everyone talking about it, if it's being their first playthrough, their first SMT, their first RPG in general. So if you're watching this and you have been playing SMT5, please let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, or if you just thought, wow, this guy sure did talk for a long time without saying anything, please also let me know. I love and I welcome any and all feedback I can. If you enjoyed this video, or even just want more videos or podcasts like this, please consider subscribing to my channel. It really helps. The growth this year with SMT5 has been absolutely crazy. I do a weekly show all about SMT and Persona called Shin Megami Tensei Network. If you like podcasts, please consider checking out that podcast. And if you want to help me fund and make stuff like this happen, I have a Patreon. It is patreon.com/SMTN. You can check it out there if you want. Links all in the description below. All the info you need is there. Thank you all so much for checking this out, but really what I want to say, thank you so much, Atlas, not only for making one of my favorite games I played this year, but easily my favorite RPG of 2021. So hats off to you. An amazing job, an amazing team worked on this game, and it really shows, because this is an absolute labor of love, and I could not have enjoyed it more if I tried. So get back to playing the game if you're still playing it. Let me know what you think about the game in the comments below if you've already beaten it. But either way, thank you all again. I know I've said it a lot, but I just want to say this is a long video. I appreciate it if anyone ever makes it through 5 minutes of my videos, let alone however long this video ends up being. So thank you all so much. Have a good time exploring Tokyo and the Netherworld, and enjoy SMT5.